Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to Family Shadows. This is the place where stories about fathers, families, and the shadows they cast across generations are told with honesty, compassion, and sometimes a quiet kind of justice. If you've been walking with us for a while, thank you. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe, to sit with us as we share these tales. Because each story, in its own way, reminds us of how fragile family bonds can be and how strong they can become when tested by truth. Tonight, I bring you a story with a title that's as heavy as it is heartbreaking. My son faked cancer to steal my savings, but the doctor revealed the truth. This is the story of Walter Grant. Walter Grant lived a quiet life in the outskirts of Springfield, a modest town with maple trees that burned gold in the fall and streets that still carried the echoes of children riding bikes at dusk. He was 62, widowed for 7 years, and the kind of man neighbors waved to from their porches because he always walked with a small, courteous nod. His house was modest, a single-story ranch with paint that needed touching up. But inside, it carried decades of memories. Framed photographs of a wife long gone, a boy who had once smiled freely, and holidays that felt warmer than the summers. Walter had worked nearly 40 years as a machinist at a parts factory. It was tough, gritty work, but he rarely complained. He saved quietly, methodically, tucking away a portion of every paycheck in a savings account that grew not into riches, but into security. His late wife, Mary, used to joke that Walter's idea of a wild night was checking the interest rates. He'd laugh, that deep chuckle that warmed the kitchen. But after she passed, the saving became his way of holding on, a discipline, a purpose, and perhaps in his heart a gift for his only son. That son was Dylan. Dylan Grant, 33, had inherited his father's height but not his discipline. Bright, yes. He had been a sharp kid, curious, even gifted in ways Walter sometimes marveled at. But life had pulled him into fits and starts. Jobs didn't stick. Relationships flared and fizzled. There was always a reason, an explanation, a promise that things will be different soon, Dad. Walter, who had lived his whole life by patience and grit, held on to those promises with the tenacity only a father can muster. And then, one late afternoon in early October, the phone rang. Walter was in the kitchen, the smell of beef stew thick in the air when the phone's vibration rattled against the counter. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, picked it up, and saw Dylan's name. "Hey, son," Walter answered warmly. There was a pause, too long, too loaded. Then Dylan's voice cracked, fragile. "Dad, I need to tell you something. It's bad, really bad." Walter's stomach tightened the way it does when your mind leaps ahead of your heart. "What is it?" Kelly's voice came through next, his daughter-in-law. She sounded as though she'd been crying. "Mr. Grant, it's cancer. Dylan has cancer." The word hit Walter like a physical blow. He sat down hard on the kitchen chair, the stew bubbling behind him, forgotten. "Cancer." His own voice sounded strange, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Dylan took the phone back. They found it late. Stage 2, maybe 3. They want to start treatment immediately. Chemo, maybe even surgery, but it's God, Dad, it's expensive. I don't even know how to." His voice broke. Walter gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles whitening. For a moment, the entire world seemed to tilt. Images of Mary's hospital room, those long, painful nights when cancer had taken her away, rushed back with merciless clarity. He remembered holding her hand as she whispered, "Take care of him, Walt, no matter what." His throat closed. "I'm here, son. We'll get through this, I promise." That night Walter couldn't sleep. He sat in the old recliner, the television flickering silently as he stared at the ceiling. Cancer. The word itself seemed to crawl across his skin to anchor itself in his chest. He thought of Dylan as a boy running across the yard with scraped knees and that wild grin. He thought of Mary, of the way she had fought with dignity even as her body betrayed her. And he thought of the savings account, the quiet pile he had built for years. It had been meant as a cushion for old age, perhaps even a small inheritance. But what was money if not for moments like this? By morning, the decision was already heavy in his bones. 2 days later, Dylan and Kelly arrived at Walter's house. Dylan looked pale, too pale, as if illness had already begun to strip him. He wore a hoodie, sleeves tugged over trembling hands. Kelly hovered protectively, her eyes red-rimmed. "Dad," Dylan whispered, sitting at the kitchen table, where so many family meals had once been shared. "The doctor says the first round alone could cost 20 grand. I don't know how to pay for it. Insurance won't cover everything." Walter reached across, placing his hand over his son's. The skin felt warm, alive. "Don't you worry about the money," he said, voice steady. "I'll take care of it." Kelly's eyes softened. "Mr. Grant, we didn't want to ask, but without treatment," she trailed off, letting the silence finish the sentence. Walter stood, walked to his bedroom, and returned with a small folder. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward Dylan. Inside were bank statements, neat and ordered. "This is everything I've saved. It's not millions, but it's enough to get you started." Dylan's lips parted, his eyes shone with something that could have been gratitude or relief. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just fight. You hear me? You fight." Kelly dabbed her eyes with a tissue, nodding. We'll do whatever it takes." That evening, Walter sat alone once more. The house felt colder without Mary, without laughter. He stared at the empty folder on the table, the weight of his decision pressing against him. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Dylan's face. Not the weary one across the table, but the boy he once was, clutching a baseball glove too big for his hand, calling, "Watch me, Dad." And Walter whispered to the dark, "I'll always watch you, son, always." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of worry and checks written out in shaky handwriting. Dylan would call with updates, another test, another round of medication, another bill that insurance somehow refused to cover. Kelly would text pictures of him resting, wrapped in blankets, his face pale and tired. Each time, Walter's heart cracked open a little more, and each time he reached deeper into the savings until the numbers dwindled down to what felt like nothing. Yet somewhere deep inside, a seed of doubt had begun to take root. The hospital bills looked different than what Walter remembered from Mary's time. The names of the medications seemed odd, the formatting on the papers slightly off. But every time the thought surfaced, he shoved it away. This was his son, his only son, and love, he reminded himself, was sometimes a matter of trust. Still, late at night, when the house was silent and the stew pot sat cold and empty in the fridge, Walter found himself whispering to the shadows, "Please, God, don't let this be another trick of fate. Don't take him too." The morning air was crisp when Walter Grant stepped out of his house, the October wind tugging at his jacket. Leaves skittered across the driveway like restless children, the kind of fall day that once would have made Mary smile and insist on a walk. Now, the world seemed quieter, heavier. He carried with him a folder, thin now, emptied of its contents the night before. But today he would make it official. The bank was a small branch downtown, tucked between a laundromat and a diner that smelled of frying bacon. Walter had been walking through its glass doors for decades. The tellers knew him by name, though none ever asked much. just a polite nod, a quick transaction. He liked it that way. He liked the orderliness, the routine, but today felt different. As he stood at the counter, his hands trembled slightly while he slid the withdrawal slip across to the young woman behind the glass. She glanced at it, then at him. "Mr. Grant," she said softly, "this is everything." Walter cleared his throat. "That's right." Her eyes flickered with something, concern, perhaps pity, but she didn't question him. Minutes later, the bills sat neatly in an envelope, thicker than anything Walter had ever held. He tucked it inside his jacket, the weight pressing against his chest like a stone. Walking back to his truck, he felt a strange hollowness. This money had taken him 40 years to gather, dollar by dollar, overtime shift after overtime shift. Each bill carried with it the grease of machines, the sweat of long nights, the echo of Mary's laughter when they dreamed of traveling one day. And now it was gone, or soon would be. Not for cruises or retirement dreams, but for his son. Always for his son. That evening, Dylan and Kelly came by again. Walter set the envelope on the table, its presence commanding silence in the room. "This should cover the first treatments," Walter said, voice steady though his heart thudded painfully. Dylan reached for it too quickly, then hesitated, pulling back as if remembering his role. "Dad, I don't know how to thank you." His eyes glistened, though whether from tears or something else, Walter couldn't be sure. Kelly laid her hand on Walter's arm. "You don't have to do this, but it means the world. You're giving him a chance." Walter looked at his son. He saw not the man hunched before him, but the boy who had once begged for just one more inning of catch in the yard. He remembered Mary's voice on her hospital bed. "Take care of him, Walt, no matter what." "I promised your mother," Walter said quietly, "and I don't break promises." The next few weeks passed in a blur of supposed treatments. Dylan would call late at night, sounding exhausted. Kelly would text photos of him lying in bed, pale and weak, tubes taped to his arms. Walter clung to those images, each one a knife and a bomb. But with each call came another request. The chemo wasn't fully covered. There was a new experimental drug. The insurance company had denied some claim. Always a reason, always a bill. Walter dipped into what little remained, selling his wife's jewelry, cashing out a small bond he had once hoped to pass to his grandchildren. Neighbors began to notice his weariness. "You all right, Walt?" asked Mr. Henderson from next door one morning as Walter collected the mail. Walter forced a smile. "Just a rough patch, family stuff." He didn't elaborate. Pride, or maybe shame, sealed his lips. At night he sat by the kitchen table, staring at the photographs on the wall. There was Mary in her Sunday dress, her arm looped through his. There was Dylan at age 10, clutching a baseball glove too big for him, grinning with missing teeth. Walter would trace those smiles with his eyes until they blurred, whispering to the empty room, "I'm doing what you asked, Mary. I'm protecting him." But the house didn't answer, and the silence pressed in heavier with each passing day. One Friday, Dylan came over, his hoodie drawn tight, face pale. He slumped into the chair, a picture of frailty. Kelly hovered nearby, wringing her hands. "They say I might need surgery, Dad," Dylan murmured, eyes downcast. "It's the only way to stop the spread." Walter's chest tightened. "How much?" Dylan winced. "They said around 30,000, but if I can't get it," his voice cracked, trailing off into silence. Walter didn't hesitate. He rose, went to the old cabinet in his bedroom, and pulled out a tin box. Inside were the last of his emergency savings, money he'd hidden away for funeral costs, should his own time come sooner than expected. He brought it out and placed it on the table. "Take it," Walter said, his voice firmer than he felt. Dylan's eyes widened. Kelly gasped softly. "Mr. Grant Walter, this is too much." "No," Walter replied, meeting his son's gaze. "There's no such thing as too much when it comes to saving your child." For a moment, Dylan's mask slipped. Something sharp flickered in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He clutched the box, nodding furiously. "Thank you, Dad. I'll never forget this." Walter smiled faintly, though his heart ached. "Just get better, son. That's all I want." That night, Walter lay awake, the house creaking around him. His body felt old, spent. He had given everything, his savings, his security, even the last pieces of Mary's jewelry. He wondered what she would say if she were here, if she would tell him he was doing the right thing, or if she would caution him, as she sometimes had, about Dylan's charm and quick excuses. But in the darkness, Walter heard only her last request echoing. "Take care of him, Walt, no matter what." So he closed his eyes, whispered a prayer, and surrendered the last of himself to the hope that his sacrifice would be enough. And yet, in the deepest corner of his mind, a whisper lingered, a doubt he dared not voice, a shadow that seemed to grow with every dollar handed over. Walter had always believed that when you did right by your family, the rest would fall into place. But now, as October waned and the leaves shriveled into brittle ghosts on the street, that belief was beginning to fray. It started with a phone call on a Sunday evening. Walter had just settled into his recliner, the football game humming softly on the television, when the ringtone pierced the room. Dylan's voice came through, hoarse, ragged. "Dad, the chemo isn't enough. They say I need a stronger drug, some kind of targeted therapy. Insurance won't cover it. The hospital needs another 10 grand up front." Walter pressed the phone closer to his ear. 10 more already. "I hate asking," Dylan whispered, his tone loaded with guilt. "But if I don't start right away, they say the tumor could spread." The word tumor clawed at Walter's chest. His mind flashed to Mary's hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic, the way her hand had felt so fragile in his. He swallowed hard. "All right, I'll see what I can do." The next day, Walter returned to the bank. The teller recognized him now, her polite smile tinged with worry. "Another withdrawal, Mr. Grant?" she asked gently. He nodded. "For medical bills." She handed him the envelope, her eyes searching his face for something he didn't have words to explain. At home, he tucked the envelope into his jacket and drove to Dylan's apartment on the other side of town. It was a modest place, but as Walter climbed the stairs, he noticed new furniture through the window, a sleek leather couch, a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Kelly opened the door, her eyes puffy as though she had been crying. "Mr. Grant, thank you. This will keep Dylan going. You're saving his life." Walter handed over the envelope without a word. Dylan emerged from the bedroom, shuffling slowly, wrapped in a blanket. He looked thinner, though Walter couldn't help but notice the faint smell of beer lingering in the air. "Dad," Dylan rasped, "I'll pay you back someday, I swear." Walter placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his heart heavy. "Just get well, that's all I need." Weeks passed in the same rhythm, a call, a request, another envelope. Walter sold his truck, the one he had driven for 15 years, to cover the newest treatment. He began taking the bus to the grocery store, clutching his paper bag of groceries against the November wind. Neighbors whispered about how tired he looked, how his clothes seemed older, more worn. At the grocery checkout, Walter's card declined once. He flushed red, fumbling for cash he no longer carried. The young cashier smiled kindly, covering the awkwardness, but Walter walked home with a weight that went far beyond the bags in his hands. Doubts began to creep in. One evening, Walter sat at his kitchen table, spreading the medical bills out before him. The paper looked official at first glance, but something gnawed at him. The fonts were slightly off. The hospital logo smudged, and one bill listed a doctor's name he didn't recognize, though he still remembered every physician who had treated Mary. He held the paper under the light, frowning. His gut twisted, but he shook his head. "No, I'm just tired, that's all." He stuffed the bills back into the folder and poured himself a glass of water. A few days later, Kelly called. Her voice was bright, almost rehearsed. "Walter, honey, Dylan's been accepted into an experimental trial. It's promising, but there's a catch. They want a donation to secure his spot. It's $15,000. Walter nearly dropped the phone. "A donation?" "Yes," she said quickly. "You know how these trials work. It's about connections, resources. This could save his life." Walter closed his eyes. He pictured Mary's face, her voice urging him to take care of Dylan. He pictured Dylan as a boy running barefoot through the yard, laughing until he hiccuped. He pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting the ache in his chest. "I'll find a way," he murmured. Kelly's sigh of relief was almost too fast. "You're a blessing, Walter, truly." But that night, Walter sat awake long after the house had gone still. His savings were gone, his emergency funds depleted, even Mary's jewelry pawned. He had nothing left but the small pension check that came each month, and even that was stretched thin. He stared at the photograph on the mantel, Mary in her Sunday dress, Dylan at 12 holding a fishing rod, all of them smiling. The picture felt like a lie now, a frozen moment from a life that no longer existed. "Am I doing the right thing, Mary?" he whispered. "Or am I just being blind?" The photograph gave no answer, only the silent echo of laughter long gone. The demands continued. First it was more medication, then travel expenses for specialists in another city. Each time Walter scrambled to comply, borrowing small amounts from old friends under the pretense of house repairs, pawning off tools he'd once sworn he'd never part with. And each time, Dylan and Kelly would accept the money with teary gratitude. Yet Walter began to notice the cracks. One evening, as Dylan reached for the envelope, Walter saw a flash of something. Was it eagerness? Desperation? Not the desperation of a man fighting for his life, but of someone clutching at easy wealth. And once when Kelly thought she was out of earshot, Walter overheard her laugh, light, careless, as she told someone on the phone, "Don't worry, he bought it. He always does." The words struck Walter like ice water down his back. But when he confronted her, she spun quickly, eyes wide. "I was talking about the landlord. He finally believed our excuse for the rent delay." Walter nodded slowly, but a knot formed in his chest that would not untangle. By December, winter had set in. Snow crusted the sidewalks, the nights grew long, and Walter's home felt colder than ever. He wore 2 sweaters to bed, the heating bill unpaid. The savings of a lifetime had vanished into the hands of his son and daughter-in-law, and still they asked for more. Yet he couldn't stop. Each time Dylan looked at him with hollow eyes, each time Kelly wept and clutched his hand, Walter felt the chains of love tightening. Love, or perhaps guilt. Love, or perhaps blindness. He whispered again to Mary's photograph, "I'm taking care of him. I promised. I'm keeping my word." But deep down in the marrow of his bones, he began to wonder if promises could sometimes become prisons. The first whisper of doubt came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Walter stopped by the small diner on Main Street for a cup of coffee. The place hadn't changed in 30 years. Red vinyl booths, the smell of bacon grease lingering in the air, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't played since the Clinton administration. Behind the counter was Linda Harper, a retired nurse who now helped her sister run the diner. She'd been around the hospital back when Mary was ill, and Walter trusted her. They exchanged polite greetings, but as Linda poured his coffee, her eyes flicked to the folder of medical bills he had left half open on the counter. "You mind if I ask, Walt?" she said carefully. "Those look like oncology forms." Walter hesitated, then sighed. "It's Dylan. He's sick. Cancer." Linda's brow furrowed as she leaned closer, scanning the paper on top. "Where'd this come from?" "Memorial Hospital," Walter said quickly. "Why?" Linda tapped the header with her fingernail. "I worked there for 20 years. That logo's outdated. They changed their forms 3 years ago." Walter's chest tightened. "Maybe it's just an old template." "Maybe," she said, but her tone carried the kind of doubt only experience could give. "Be careful, Walt." He carried her words home like a stone in his pocket, heavy and impossible to set down. That night he pulled out the folder again, spreading the bills across the table. By the dim light of the kitchen lamp he studied every line. The fonts didn't match. Dates seemed shuffled. One invoice listed a doctor named Dr. Carson, but Walter remembered vividly that the oncology department had never had a Dr. Carson when Mary was treated there. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. His heart wanted to believe Dylan. His mind whispered otherwise. The next weekend, Walter visited Dylan's apartment unannounced. Kelly opened the door, clearly startled. She offered a quick smile, but behind her shoulder, Walter glimpsed something that made his stomach churn. Shopping bags from a high-end department store, a new coffee machine gleaming on the counter, and the faint buzz of laughter from a television playing a comedy show. "Dad," Dylan called from the couch, pulling a blanket over himself, coughing weakly. "Didn't expect you." Walter forced a smile. "Thought I'd bring over some stew. Made too much." And Kelly ushered him in quickly, fussing about the kitchen. Dylan sat hunched, but his eyes darted nervously to the bags near the door. Walter's gaze lingered, and for a moment their eyes locked, father and son in a silent battle neither dared name. "Treatment's been rough," Dylan murmured, breaking the tension. "But the new meds are helping. Just expensive, you know." Walter nodded slowly, setting the pot of stew on the counter. He wanted to ask about the bags. He wanted to demand explanations, but the words lodged in his throat like stones. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, Mary's photograph glowing faintly in the moonlight from the dresser. "What if he's lying?" he whispered. "What if all this, what if it's not real?" The silence pressed in and guilt gnawed at him. What kind of father doubts his own son? But then again, what kind of son would exploit his father's love? The doubts grew louder. At the grocery store, Walter overheard Kelly's voice before he saw her. She stood in the next aisle, speaking quickly on the phone. "No, don't worry, we've got it covered." He actually believed it. Another check's coming. Walter froze, the can of beans slipping from his hand. He stood still until her laughter faded down the aisle. When she noticed him, she plastered on a smile. "Oh, hi, Mr. Grant, just picking up a few things." He nodded stiffly, but his stomach burned. By December, the cold was relentless. Walter's house felt more hollow than ever, stripped of warmth and savings. The heating oil tank ran low, but he told himself he could manage with sweaters. Every dollar had gone to Dylan and Kelly, and still they wanted more. One night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, Walter spread out the folder again. He stared at the bills until the numbers blurred. He remembered Linda's warning, Kelly's laughter, the shopping bags, the too perfect timing of every request. His chest ached with the weight of it. He pressed his hands together, as if in prayer. "Mary," he whispered, "I promised you I'd protect him, but what if protecting him means protecting him from himself?" The room was silent but for the hum of the refrigerator. Somewhere outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and in that howl Walter felt something shift. Doubt no longer whispered, it roared. The next morning he made a decision. He would stop waiting, stop guessing, stop letting the guilt of promises blind him. He would go to the hospital himself. He would speak to a doctor. He would find out the truth, whatever it cost him. Walter rose before dawn, the winter sky still bruised with night. He brewed a pot of coffee, though he hardly tasted it, his hands restless on the mug. For weeks, whispers had haunted him, Linda's doubt, the strange bills, Kelly's laughter, and now they pressed so loud in his mind he could no longer ignore them. He dialed Dylan's number, heart pounding. "Dad." Dylan's voice came through groggy. "I want to come with you today," Walter said, no hesitation. "To the hospital, to your treatment." A pause stretched too long. "That's Dad, that's not really necessary." "It is," Walter replied firmly. "I want to see for myself. I want to sit with you. No son should go through this alone." Another pause, muffled voices in the background, Kelly's voice faint, hurried. Then Dylan again, strained. "Fine, but it's boring, you know, long hours." "I don't care," Walter said. "I'll be there." When Walter arrived at their apartment later that morning, Kelly opened the door, her smile brittle. "Oh, Mr. Grant," she said, her voice too bright. "You didn't have to trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," Walter replied, stepping inside. "I promised Mary I'd always be there for him." Kelly's smile faltered just slightly. "Well, all right then, let me just grab his things." Dylan emerged from the bedroom, hoodie pulled low, eyes darting. "You sure about this, Dad? It's really nothing to see." Walter placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I need to see it, son, for me." Dylan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The hospital loomed gray against the winter sky, its windows catching the weak sun. Walter hadn't been back since Mary's final days, and as he stepped through the sliding doors, a wave of memory crashed over him. The smell of antiseptic, the squeak of rubber soles, the hushed voices of nurses. His chest ached, but he pressed forward. Dylan walked ahead, Kelly clinging to his arm. Walter followed, his eyes scanning everything. The oncology ward had changed since Mary's time, but not by much. He recognized the corridors, the waiting area with its stiff chairs, the posters on the walls urging patients to fight with courage. A receptionist greeted them. "Name?" she asked. "Dylan Grant," Dylan said quickly. She typed, frowned slightly, then smiled again. "Have a seat, someone will be with you." Walter watched her carefully. That slight frown lingered in his mind. They sat in the waiting area. Dylan slouched low, eyes glued to his phone. Kelly fussed with her scarf, avoiding Walter's gaze. Walter leaned forward. "What's the name of your doctor again?" he asked casually. Dylan hesitated. "Dr. Carson." Walter nodded slowly. He remembered Linda's words. There had never been a Dr. Carson in oncology. His chest tightened. Minutes dragged. Nurses came and went, calling names, guiding patients. Dylan shifted in his seat, glancing often at the clock. Kelly whispered to him, her words too low for Walter to catch. Finally, Walter rose. "I'll get some coffee," he said, and walked toward the vending machine. But instead of stopping, he circled back toward the reception desk. "Excuse me," he said softly to the woman there. "Could you check again? My son, Dylan Grant, what doctor is he scheduled with?" She tapped the keys, brows knitting. "I don't see a Dylan Grant scheduled for today in oncology. Are you sure you have the right department?" Walter's heart lurched. "Yes," he whispered. "He told me Dr. Carson." The receptionist shook her head gently. "We don't have a Dr. Carson here." Walter's hands trembled. He forced a tight smile. "Thank you." When he returned to the waiting area, Dylan stood abruptly. "They're running behind," he said too quickly. "We should just go, no point waiting all day." Walter studied him, the way his eyes darted, the flush creeping up his neck. Kelly grabbed her purse. "Yes, let's go, maybe we'll come back tomorrow." Walter's voice came low, steady, carrying years of paternal authority. "We're not leaving until I speak with a doctor." Dylan froze, Kelly's eyes widened. The air grew heavy, the hum of the hospital around them fading into silence. Walter could feel his heart pounding, but his gaze did not waver. For the first time in years, Dylan looked small before him, like a boy caught in a lie. They stood in the waiting room, the weight of truth pressing closer, step by step. Walter knew in his bones that the moment he had feared was near, that the fragile mask would soon shatter, and what lay beneath might destroy what little remained of their family. He braced himself because the next voice he heard would not be his son's. It would be the doctor's. The waiting room felt like it was shrinking, every sound magnified, the shuffle of shoes, the ding of an elevator, the muted cough of an old man in the corner. Walter sat rigid, his eyes fixed on his son. Dylan fidgeted, his leg bouncing uncontrollably, his hoodie pulled low as if to hide from more than just the fluorescent lights. Kelly leaned in, whispering urgently, but Walter could hear the sharp edge in her tone. Then a voice cut through the hum. "Mr. Grant." They all turned. A woman in a white coat stood at the doorway, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her badge catching the light. "Dr. Rachel Foster," the nameplate read. Her eyes moved from Dylan to Walter, landing with quiet steadiness on the father. "Yes," Walter said, standing quickly. "That's me, Doctor." Foster's gaze softened. "Could I have a word with you?" Dylan leapt to his feet. "No, that's okay, we were just leaving." Walter's voice came like steel. "Sit down, Dylan." The command stunned the room into silence. For a moment, Walter was not the weary father with thinning hair and calloused hands. He was the man who had built a life from nothing, who had buried a wife with dignity, who had sacrificed every cent for his son. Dylan sat, his eyes narrowing, but he obeyed. Walter followed Dr. Foster into a small consultation room. The walls were a neutral beige, the air faintly scented with disinfectant. He closed the door behind him, his palms damp. "Doctor," Walter began, his voice trembling. "My son, Dylan Grant. He told me he's been undergoing treatment here, that he has cancer." "Doctor." Foster studied him quietly, then shook her head. "Mr. Grant, I want to be very clear, we have no patient by that name in our oncology department." Walter blinked. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and impossible. "No, that can't be right. He showed me bills, prescriptions, "I understand, Doctor," Foster said gently, "but I checked our system myself. There is no record. Dylan Grant has never been treated here, nor has he been diagnosed with cancer by our team." Walter's throat constricted. He felt as if the room tilted beneath him. "You're saying he's not sick?" "Doctor," Foster folded her hands. Her tone was firm, compassionate. "Mr. Grant, your son is healthy. Whatever documents you've seen did not come from this hospital." Walter gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Images flooded his mind, every envelope, every check, every sacrifice. Selling Mary's jewelry, cashing in his bonds, wearing sweaters to bed while his son bought leather couches. It hit him all at once. The betrayal, the manipulation, the devastating truth. Dylan had faked it all. His chest heaved, not just with anger, but with grief. Grief for the boy he thought he knew, the man he had hoped his son would become. Grief for the promise he had made to Mary that he would protect Dylan no matter what. "I gave him everything," Walter whispered, voice cracking. "Everything I had. Doctor Foster's eyes softened. I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. Sometimes love blinds us, but you deserve the truth. When Walter emerged from the room, his face was pale, his jaw set like stone. Dylan and Kelly jumped to their feet. What did she say? Dylan asked quickly, his voice tight. Walter stared at him, his silence heavier than any shout. Finally he spoke, his voice low, trembling with controlled fury. She said, "You've never been treated here, not once." Dylan's face drained of color. "Dad, she's wrong. Maybe she checked the wrong file. Maybe." "Enough." Walter's voice boomed through the waiting room. Heads turned. Nurses paused mid-step. "Enough lies." Kelly clutched Dylan's arm. "Mr. Grant, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Walter cut in, his eyes blazing. "I've been nothing but a wallet to you. You took my savings, my wife's jewelry, every dollar I worked for, and you dared use her memory, her fight, to twist the knife deeper." His voice broke, raw with pain. "How could you?" The silence was suffocating. Dylan's mouth opened, closed. No excuses came. Kelly's eyes darted, her usual quick tongue stilled by the weight of Walter's fury. Walter turned away, his shoulders heavy but unbowed. He walked toward the doors, each step echoing like a drumbeat. People in the waiting room watched, some with pity, others with quiet recognition of a father's heartbreak. Behind him, Dylan called out weakly, "Dad, wait." But Walter didn't turn. Not this time. For the first time since Mary's passing, he felt her presence beside him, steadying him, whispering strength into his weary bones. He pushed through the sliding doors, the winter air cutting sharp against his face. The truth was his now, and with it a new kind of burden, one that would demand not just sorrow but justice. The drive home from the hospital felt endless. Walter's old sedan rumbled over patches of ice, headlights cutting through the dark. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. Every word from Dr. Foster echoed in his mind. "Your son is healthy. He has never been treated here." The betrayal sat heavy in his chest, heavier than any debt or loss of money. He had been lied to, used, stripped of his savings, and worse, of his faith in the boy he once cradled in his arms. Yet beneath the grief was something sharper, cleaner, resolve. That night, Walter sat at the kitchen table, a tape recorder beside him. Dr. Foster, seeing the devastation in his eyes, had offered to speak again, this time on record. The tape now contained her calm, steady voice confirming the truth. Walter pressed the recorder once more, listening to her words until they etched themselves into his bones. He wasn't going to shout, wasn't going to swing fists or slam doors. No, his justice would be quiet, undeniable, like the slow turning of the tide. Sunday arrived. Kelly had suggested a family dinner, perhaps to smooth things over, perhaps to convince Walter to hand over what little he still had. But Walter saw it as an opportunity. He called his sister Margaret, his old friend Bill, and even Linda from the diner. He wanted witnesses, people who had known him, known Mary, known Dylan since boyhood. The table was set in Dylan's apartment. A roast sat steaming at the center, the air thick with forced cheer. Kelly bustled with plates, her smile too polished. Dylan tried for casual, but his eyes flicked nervously toward his father again and again. "Dad," Dylan said, raising a glass, "I just want to say thank you for everything. You've been incredible." Walter met his gaze, calm as still water. "You're welcome, son." The words hung strangely in the air. Margaret shifted uncomfortably. Bill frowned. Kelly's smile wavered. Dinner passed in strained conversation, laughter too sharp, too brittle. Finally, Walter set down his fork, folded his hands, and looked around the table. "There's something I need to share," he said quietly. His voice carried, firm and steady, and the room stilled. He reached into his coat pocket and placed the small recorder on the table. "This," he continued, "is Dr. Rachel Foster from Memorial Hospital. I asked her a simple question, whether Dylan Grant was her patient." Kelly's face drained of color. Dylan froze. Walter pressed play. The doctor's voice filled the room, calm, factual, undeniable. "Mr. Grant, your son has never been treated here. He has never been diagnosed with cancer by our department." The words rang like a bell, each syllable cutting through the air. Silence followed, utter, suffocating silence. Margaret gasped. Bill shook his head, eyes narrowing at Dylan. Linda leaned back, her lips tight, her suspicions confirmed. Walter looked directly at his son. "You lied to me. You forged bills. You drained every cent I had, and you let me believe you were dying after watching cancer take your mother." His voice cracked but did not falter. "Do you know what that did to me? To sit here every night remembering her fight and thinking you were facing the same." Dylan opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat worked, his eyes darted. Kelly stammered, It was my idea. Dylan didn't." "Stop," Walter said firmly. "Both of you made your choices. Both of you betrayed my trust." The room was thick with judgment. Margaret's eyes brimmed with tears. Bill muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Linda shook her head slowly, her disappointment palpable. Walter rose, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not here to beg for my money back. Money can be earned again. What cannot be restored so easily is trust. You stole not just my savings, you stole the last promise I made to your mother, and for that I can never forgive you." Dylan's face crumpled, shame and rage warring in his eyes. "Dad, please." Walter held up a hand. "No, I've heard enough. From now on I live for the truth. And the truth is, you are not the son I raised. You are a stranger who wears his face." With that, Walter turned to the others. "You are all here tonight so there would be no more whispers, only truth. Let it be known what was done, not to shame, but to make sure I don't carry this burden alone." The room remained silent. Even Kelly's usual quick words failed her. Walter picked up his coat, the recorder still humming faintly on the table. He didn't slam the door as he left. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any storm. Outside, the winter air bit at his cheeks, but for the first time in months, Walter felt lighter. Justice wasn't always about courts or police. Sometimes it was about standing up calmly, firmly, and refusing to be deceived any longer. And as he walked down the quiet street, the snow crunching beneath his boots, he whispered to the night, "I kept my promise, Mary. I protected him, even from himself." Walter returned to his quiet home that night, the weight of the evening still clinging to his coat. He hung it by the door, the recorder heavy in his pocket, its truth already spoken aloud. The house felt no different, the same photographs on the walls, the same creak in the floorboards, but something inside him had shifted. He sat in his chair, staring at the picture of Mary on the mantel. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to soften the ache in his chest. "I did what I could," he whispered. "I promised to protect him, and maybe this was the only way left." The silence was gentle this time, not suffocating. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly through the family. Margaret called often, her voice tender, offering to help with groceries. Bill stopped by to shovel snow from Walter's walkway, muttering about no son worth his salt would ever. Linda brought over soup, setting it down with a firm pat on his shoulder. Walter accepted their kindness, though he never asked for it. What mattered most was that the lie no longer had power over him. The truth was out. Christmas came, quieter than the ones before. No stockings hung for Dylan, no gifts wrapped for Kelly. Instead, Walter lit a candle by Mary's photograph, whispering her name as snow fell softly outside. He thought of Dylan often, not with anger but with sorrow. A father's love, he realized, does not vanish with betrayal. It lingers, stubborn and aching. But love without trust is only pain, and he could no longer carry that burden alone. He prayed, not for money returned or apology spoken, but for his son to one day find his way back to decency, to honor. One evening in January, Walter walked down Main Street, the cold sharp in his lungs. At the diner, Linda waved him in. A few old friends sat at the counter, and as he joined them, he felt something he hadn't in months: belonging. They spoke of ordinary things: the weather, the high school basketball game, the new pastor at church. Walter smiled faintly, realizing that life had not ended with Dylan's betrayal. It had merely shifted, forcing him to lean more on those who truly valued him. The truth had cost him dearly, but it had also freed him. Back at home, he wrote a note and tucked it inside Mary's Bible. The words were simple: money can be lost and earned again. Trust, once broken, is not so easily repaired. But truth is the light that saves us, even when it burns. He closed the Bible gently, as if sealing a prayer. That night he sat in his chair, looking at the family photographs. He knew the scars of betrayal would remain. He knew Dylan and Kelly might never understand the depth of the wound they had inflicted. But he also knew this: he had not been destroyed. He had stood for truth quietly but firmly, and in doing so he had honored both himself and Mary. Walter leaned back, whispering into the stillness, "The truth hurts, but it heals too, and maybe that's enough." And dear friends, that brings us to the end of tonight's story. At Family Shadows, we share these stories not only to reveal betrayal or injustice, but to remind us all of the fragile, precious bonds of family, and of the strength it takes to stand for what is right, even when it comes at a painful cost. Thank you for joining us, for listening with open hearts. May this story remind us all to cherish honesty, to honor the sacrifices of those who came before, and to protect the love that truly matters. From our family to yours, may you have good health, peace, and the warmth of loved ones around your table. Stay safe, stay kind, and may your families be blessed with happiness.